Episode 238 of the Bevan James Eyles Show. 5 things to think about when you're trying to cement long-term change. Rightio team, welcome along to episode 238 of the Bevan James Eyles Show, your fortnightly podcast on the behaviours that create a lifetime love of fitness so you can get all the benefits that come alongside it. It's a Bevan show. I haven't done a Bevan show in a few episodes because I've had a couple interviews and I'm trying to line up a really cool interview for my next episode. So I like getting good interviews, but I also like doing my Bevan shows. And today's show is a show about a topic that I've been thinking a little bit lately about, and really it's some strategies to cement long-term change. Often people go through moments of change and then they kind of go back to what they were. And I want to talk, and there's probably lots of things we can do in this area, but I've got 5 things I think to think about when you're actually trying to create long-term change, and we'll go deeper into that and later on in the show. Secondly, I do actually want to talk about something before I start the main gist of the show. So I had a really interesting experience this week. So I got asked to do a presentation in Christchurch here. 5 of the primary schools within a certain kind of cluster decided to put together, they started this new thing, which was a conference for kids going from primary to high school. So for those people overseas, basically, think of high school, it's the kids getting ready to go to high school. So they're about 12, 13, and they're at that last moment of high school, and the next 6 months are going to go to high school. And the presentation I had to do for these kids was kind of 45 minutes. And they just said, can you do something good for 13-year-olds? And I said yes to it about a year ago, and it was meant to happen a year ago, and then COVID happened. And so it got postponed, and at the time they said, do you mind if we get in contact again? And so they gave me a date, which was this week, and I kind of just forgot about it. And then about a month ago, they sent me the email just saying, hey, are you still confirmed? And I was like, yep, all good. Now, I do a lot of public speaking, and I really enjoy public speaking. Here's the thing about public speaking. As a public speaker, you're a bit like a comedian, as in that when you go watch a comedian live, you think you've heard that comedian tell those jokes for the first time, especially if they're a really great comedian. But if you go to the comedian show the next night, it's pretty much the same jokes, and that's the same thing day in, day out. And as a public speaker, I tend to have 10 talks, or I probably, in theory, I probably have about 20 subjects. And the way I design a talk is I tend to do my origin story, which is like 10 minutes. And then depending on the need of who I'm speaking to, I'll put together and the time frame I have. So they might want to speak for an hour. So in an hour, I'll do my origin talk, and then there'll be 3 key lessons I want you to take away from that. And so really I have about 20 key lessons, and I've got all these kind of stories and ways I present these lessons that I've got kind of in my repertoire of speaking. And so when someone comes to me and they say, can you do a talk? I say, yep. And I say, what are the needs of what do you want to kind of get for this talk? And then I kind of think, okay, well, this 15-minute block will work really well because this message is important to what they're needing to do. And then I'll put together the talk, I'll practice, I'll go do the talk, and, Bob's your uncle. Well, sometimes I say yes to a talk, and I actually haven't got a talk for them. And this is what happened this week. So, I haven't done it. I've never spoken to a group of 13-year-olds before. And so, it means it's a lot more work for me because I have to design a talk. And designing a talk is something that takes a lot of time because you've got to kind of think of what are your messages. You've got to spend a lot of time thinking of, I always think you've got to find the stories because it's really about stories. You've got to find stories which are really great stories that are leading to the revolution or the revealing of the message. And then once you reveal the message, you might give some practical advice after the fact. But ultimately, you're trying to find great stories. And if I go back to those 15-minute blocks, each of those 20 kind of blocks I have, they've got key messages, and there might be practical application, but they always start with a story. So in designing a new talk takes a lot of time. And basically on Sunday last week, I was doing the talk on Wednesday morning at 9:30. So on Sunday last week, I gave myself about 2 or 3 hours. Then I booked out 2 or 3 hours on both the Monday and the Tuesday. So I gave myself about 7 hours to design this talk, which is a lot of time. And there's probably a bit of a buffer in there. And it's a 45-minute talk. So I kind of thought, takes that much time. Well, I sit down to design a talk, and I was instantly in trouble. Because, what do you speak to 13-year-olds about? And I actually started my talk with this kind of concept of, I don't know you. I don't know. There's that thing of we've been that age before, so we think we have insight into that age. It's that thing of when you're 20, you look back at a 15-year-old and you think, I know so much about your life. And there's a truth to this. There is a truth to this thing that, experience of a previous life or a previous time does show insight. When you think of the angst of being a teenager, most of us kind of understand it after the teenage period. But then I don't actually know exactly what that life is right now. I'm a 45-year-old man. Me, 13 years, that's 30 years ago for me. So when I sat down to design talk, I really started to struggle about, A, how do I start the talk? And B, what are the messages that I want to put together? And I struggled so much. So I worked on Sunday, I worked on Monday, and I worked on Tuesday. And by the end of Tuesday, I still hadn't completed it. I'd found my intro, I'd found my first and second point, but my third point, I knew the point. I knew the point I wanted to share with them, but I didn't know the story. I didn't know how to put it together. So literally, Wednesday morning comes along, I had to go coach my runners. So I get home at 7:30. This presentation's happening at 9:30. I have an hour to finish the talk off, basically, because I've got 8:30. I've got to get in the car, get to this presentation, do the presentation. I get there. I do get there, and it was interesting. Joe was saying it was really interesting because I was pretty stressed. I got to be honest. I was pretty stressed because I hadn't really finished the talk on Wednesday morning. I finished 2 parts of it, but I hadn't finished the last part. And designing talk's one thing, but practice and repetition is another thing. So if you come along and get me to do a talk, even though I've got those 20 blocks, I would have practiced it in my office here, standing up, actually doing the whole talk with my slides in front of you 10 times. Or quite a few times, maybe not 10 times, but I've done it a few times, so I know my beats, even my origin story. Even though I could tell you my origin story from start to finish right now, I would still go over it in my head and practice it out loud, because I like to have that kind of cementing of the experience I'm going to create by practicing it before I do it. And so while by the end I did actually get the presentation done, I hadn't practiced it to a level that I knew that I like to do. So as I leave for my house, I definitely knew I had a presentation, which was good. I wasn't confident in my presentation of it. Not that I thought I was going to be terrible, because I obviously got a base level of skill in this area, but I didn't know my beats. You kind of know your beats. You kind of know the beats when you've done your practice. So I turn up, and a lovely lady called Gretchen had coordinated the talk, and I go up to her and say, and I was really upfront. I said, I'm going to be really honest. I've really struggled with this presentation because I'm not quite sure of the level to pitch it at and the tone to pitch it at. Now, one thing I wanted to do is I did want to do it in a way where, I wanted to treat the 13-year-olds like intelligent people. I don't want, it wasn't being condescending or looking down on, it was like, mate, you guys are intelligent. I've got some stuff to offer, and even that's the way I always approach a talk. I always approach a talk of, whoever I'm talking to is an intelligent bunch of people. You've got levels of success. You've obviously done pretty well in some areas of your life. I've got something to offer. And I think it's really important as a presenter because, if you respect your audience, then they'll respect you. And so even with 13-year-olds, I wanted to have that experience. But I arrive at this kind of venue, and the kids hadn't arrived yet, and I go up to Gretchen and I just say, look, I've really struggled with this. I hope I've got it right, but I'm not quite sure if I have. The kids come along, and one thing that's really important in any area of your life is you want to give them a sense of they're in good hands. So as much as I was feeling a bit of doubt myself, it was one of those kind of fake it till you make it moments. So when the kids arrived, I had good energy. I was saying hi to the kids. I was connecting with the kids. I was trying to build that rapport before I got up and presented with them. So They do a bit of an introduction. They kind of do the thing, the first 15 minutes where they're talking through their day and the rest of it. And then I come on and do my talk. And it was a success. It was a real success. Like, so much so, one of the teachers came up to me afterwards with tears in her eye and saying, you really nailed it out of the park. Now, it was one of those moments, sometimes, like, I really like preparation. Like, I really like preparation. And the reason I really like preparation is because I like to go into situations with trust that I'm going to do well. And in this situation, I didn't have that level of trust. And luckily, I pulled it off. And there's a story I could have told where I didn't quite pull it off in this situation. Luckily, I did. But when she came up to me and, it was really interesting because I knew I had the kids as well. Because as a speaker, you've got your audience, and especially, because you have their attention and they're drawn into you and their eyes are on you and there's this thing. And I have to be honest, with kids, I wasn't sure if I'd had that ability. And so the talk went well. And I just thought, why am I telling you all this right now? Well, because I thought I'd share my 3 key points to these kids. Because one thing I thought about when I did finally crack what I wanted to talk about is I wanted to talk about universal truths. Universal truths that no matter what your age are really important. But also when we think of the teenager going from kind of that school before high school, now in New Zealand it's kind of primary or intermediate. I don't know what that would be in your country, but if you're overseas it would be a different thing. I wanted to give them philosophies that are really important at that moment, in that massive transition moment in your life, but also for long-term future living. And I get it. These 3 points are good points. Some of them, kids may even thought they're cool. Maybe they won't apply them or not, but they had a note. So what were the points? Point number 1, and I'm not going to tell you this. I'm not going to do the presentation I did. I'm just going to tell you the points. So point number 1 was you need to learn to love. No, sorry. You need to learn how to manage and enjoy the uncomfortable part of growth. You need to learn to manage and enjoy the uncomfortable part of growth. Like, you think right now, you're 13 and you're going to high school. There's so much growth in front of you. There's social growth, there's academic growth, there's emotional growth, there's all these moments, many new moments of change these kids have to face. And if they close themselves off at those moments, they're going to limit themselves. And I often think, and the story I kind of told was because I failed high school. Like, I left at 15, no qualifications at all. So, it's funny that I'm doing this talk to these kids. And I talked to them about my failure. And I talked about how ultimately when I got to high school, I was so uncomfortable with growth that I just ended up quitting. And I think this is a great metaphor for life in general. Because I think what happens is, because here's the thing, growth is uncomfortable. Growth is uncomfortable. Like, think of me playing the piano when I get to a piece that's really uncomfortable. It's that thing where it gets really uncomfortable when you want to grab your phone. Because why do you grab your phone? Because it's uncomfortable. Or when you're doing exercise to a new level and you're trying to talk yourself out of it. Why are you trying to talk yourself out of it? Because it's uncomfortable. But if you want to be somebody who grows in life, you need to learn how to manage and enjoy that. And when you look at people who are consistent growers in life, They learn how to manage that. And I was actually speaking to someone recently, and I was talking about a guy called Christian Blumenfeld. Christian Blumenfeld, for those in triathlon, you'll know who he is. But for those outside of triathlon, he is, in the last 12 months, has arguably had the greatest 12 months in the history of the sport. He's won the Olympic gold medal. Literally, it was kind of just 12 months ago to the day. He's won the Ironman World Championships. He went under 7 hours, the first person in the history to go under 7 hours. He's just been a freak of nature in the last 12 months. And I love when you look at athletes, because when you look at athletes, there's many types of athletes. There's the kind of the middle of the road athlete who's just a good athlete, but maybe doesn't have a top form. Then you get athletes who have moments of greatness but don't have a sustained career. And then you get athletes who have a long-term sustained career. Now, one thing about those people is they know how to turn up consistently at the highest level. Like, think about your favourite sport. Who's that athlete? Like, I think of it in rugby league right now, like Cameron Smith. I think of in triathlon, Jan Frodeno, Daniela Reef, Chrissy Wellington in triathlon. In your sport, who is that athlete who consistently performed at the highest level for a long period of time? And what these people have learnt to do is they've learnt to manage that place. They know that place and they know how to go there, and they enjoy being in that place. And that's the message I want to get to kids, because as they go to high school, they're going to have lots of uncomfortable. And if you can't manage it and you don't enjoy it, what are you going to do? You're going to repress yourself and withdraw yourself and go to safety, where you will limit your growth in your life. So that's why I wanted to get that message to kids. Now, as I talk about this right now to you, how good are you? How good are you at managing and enjoying the uncomfortable that comes with growth? It's not uncomfortable. It's the uncomfortable that comes with growth. Like when you're doing something that requires a lot of focus, how good are you at managing it? Do you enjoy that place? And that's what we've got you to get you to think about is, again, manage and enjoy the uncomfortable side of growth. So that was my first point. My second point was, you've probably heard me talk on the show, when we think about teenagers, one of the biggest parts of their next moment is connection. And it's a really important thing, because often at that stage of life, friends is the most important thing. But also at the early stage of life, you can just make lots of mistakes. You can do things that, and it's part of learning. It's part of learning, obviously, but you can make mistakes around relationship. You can hurt people around relationship. You don't know how to deal with your own emotion because you're going through so much change that you can do things that you regret later after the fact. Like, I think of myself as a teenage kid, and to my partners, I was a pretty horrible partner. To my friends, at times I talk behind backs. It's kind of just basic stuff. And I've got a saying which I've probably talked about on this podcast. I guarantee I would have. And it's, when people spend time with me, they will feel better. And I wanted to share that message with them. And I think I even changed the context around it. Actually, let me pull up the notes for this talk, because I think I'm going to pause because I think I changed the reference of it just a little bit. I'll be back in 1 second. That's what I did. Yeah, so what I did was, the saying I have is, when people spend time with me, they will feel life is better. And I just put there and there. So when people spend a lot of time with me, they'll feel their life is better. And again, I won't go too deep in this one because I've talked about this on the show, but it is that thing of what do you do in the way you give to the world and give to other people that makes them feel their life is better? Like it's little things, but another teacher came up to me afterwards and she said, I used to do your classes at the gym. She said, you knew when Bevan arrived and you knew you felt great, and and when you walked out, you always felt great about yourself. That's first thing I do is, when I walk into the gym and I walk into a class, I yell out to everyone, "Hey, everyone, awesome to see you here." That's a small thing that I do to make people feel good. When they leave, I'll use a lot of statements about them. You guys are so hardworking. So I'm thinking about these things in my interaction with other people. When I talk to people, I try to open up their possibilities. So it's that kind of, when people spend time with me, they'll feel their life is better, is a really interesting thing to think about. And obviously, as kids are going into this period of their life, that's a subject I wanted to talk about. And then the last subject, and again, I'll probably talk about this on the podcast, but I guarantee I have, so I won't go too deeply into it, but was that thing that Bob Dylan talked about, was when, what was the thing he said? Was, I always hear people talking about finding themselves. I thought it was my job to create myself, create the person I want to be. And I just thought that was a really cool message to give to teenagers, because, like, going into that teenage years, you do get to create who you want to be. And if you close off to what high school has to offer, you could actually miss the opportunity. And so I just wanted to kind of share that message with them as well. So those were the three messages. It was number one. What was number one? It was learn to manage and enjoy the uncomfortable side of growing. Number two was, when people spend time with me, they'll feel their life is better. And then number three was, life is not about finding yourself, it's about creating yourself. So again, hopefully, they are universal. Maybe there's something in there for you. Anyway, let's get into the main gist of today's show. Before I do, I just want to say a big thank you to the patrons of the show. Patrons are the people who give some of their hard-earned money each time I release an episode of this podcast. And when you become a patron, you get a cool Bevan James Eyles Show nickname. And here are some of the people that are patrons of the show. First of all, we've got Brittany Mystic McKeechin, we've got Greg the Python Crowley, we've got Luke Mayhem Miller, we've got Pip Silent Assassin Langford, and we've got Kate the Perfect One Soudan. If you want to become a patron again, go to bevanjameseyles.com, click on podcast, click on support me, and you can go your way. Actually, one other way you can support me is get my book. That's the best way to support me. Go to passionaboutexercise.com, support my book. When you get my book, remember you get the bonuses of the workouts. You also get my 7-day goal setting workshop. These are both worth the value of the book in itself. So, if you want to set some goals, go get my book and you get my goal setting workshop as well. Anyway, here is the main gist of the show. So this morning I had a really interesting experience. I got my running group and we kind of just started our new Get Up to 5 group. And it's a good time of year to start to 5 group because in winter, it's definitely more challenging for people in winter. And we get a group in winter and they do really well, seriously. But, spring is obviously a moment where a lot of people think about change. It's a bit like the beginning of the year. Come out of winter, you want to create change. Beginning of the year, you want to create change. So our group's always pretty big as we head into the spring. And it's also just nicer time to train. But we had a new group come along this morning. And we had a lady come up to me who had joined the group a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and done the group. No, probably 2 years ago actually. Had done the group 2 years ago and did it once, ran 5Ks, and then kind of went and did her own thing after the fact. And obviously in that time she had fallen away from running, and she said to me that she'd gone through some pretty hard life stuff, and I didn't dig too deep, but obviously I was saying, well, it's good to have you back. And she said, actually, you made a video. I do my Keep Active with Bevan videos. If you want to get those emailed to you, go to keepactivewithbevan.com. And each week I just kind of make a 7-minute clip, which I send out to my database. And I made a clip a few weeks ago about how I had a really crap Friday. And it was kind of like just a really wasteful day, a really dissatisfying day, and, just not a great day. And the message of it is that I didn't let my Friday creep into my Saturday. So I had a crap Friday. I think I spent way too much time on the phone, ate way too much food, did no exercise. I would have gone for a walk. I always do for a walk on a Friday. But, and it was just a really dissatisfying day. But then the message was, the good thing about me is on the Saturday morning, I got up and I was straight back on track. And it was just kind of like, we all have crap days. Don't let it be the norm. And she said to me, when I saw that video, I knew I needed to come back to the group because I've kind of been living a bit like lots of crap Fridays. And so she joined back to the group, and it was really good because A, she's a lovely person, B, will help her get back to a good place, and C, she's made a good decision for herself. And as I'm talking to her, a guy called Gareth comes up behind her and taps her on the shoulder, and she sees him and she goes, "Oh my God, good to see you." And there's this kind of nice moment of connection. And the reason they knew each other, and at first I thought they must know each other from life, that maybe they knew each other from work or something like that. But it wasn't the case. She had met Gareth when she did Get Up to 5 2 years ago. And there was a moment of massive contrast because Gareth 2 years ago joined our group, and he was, I don't know how big he was, but I think Gareth's lost maybe 20 to 30 kg. He's lost a lot of weight. And now he's an athlete. Like, now Gareth has gone from being an overweight, non-moving person to, not just losing the weight, but a focused, hard athlete. So much so, actually, another one of our runners, a lovely lady called Penny. We did our epic race a couple of weeks ago, and Penny was telling me, when you see, like when you work with people a lot, like I've got our race team group, which tends to be about 100 people, and they tend to come back a lot, so we get to know them really well. And you see when someone's gone to that next level. And recently, Penny's ran with us for a long time, but recently Penny's has gone, she was just focused. She was just, you could see it in her training. She was running faster than she ever had. She had that look. There's a look You really is. When you see someone who's ran with you for a long time who decides to go to that next level, they have a look. And Penny had this look. And after we had the race, where they had a race a couple of weeks ago, and we had a kind of a catch up after the fact, and I just went up to Penny and I said, mate, I'm really proud of you because I could see that you'd gone to the next level in this block, and I could see how focused you were. And she said, yeah, I've not just for my training, I got a nutritionist. I was more committed. I did more planning. She just did everything to the next level. And I think on the race day, she did nail the race. I don't know by how much, but she absolutely nailed the race. And she just basically showed a higher level of commitment to her achieving the things that she wanted to achieve. And Penny said to me, what really inspired me was Gareth. When Gareth trains, he always turns up, and you can just see he always gives it everything he's got. And after seeing him, I just thought, you know what, I'm not going to that level. And that was a cool moment because Gareth 2 years ago was an overweight, unfit man who was doing no exercise at all. Now's lost 30 kg. Now's smashing out half marathons. Now's an athlete. But also an athlete who inspires other athletes, because Penny's not a beginner. Penny's been running for years. She's done marathons, she's done half, she's done lots of racing, and she was inspired by Gareth. And it was a really cool thing. But taking it back to this morning, this was a really interesting moment because we had this really interesting moment of contrast. Because 2 years ago, both Gareth and the other lady had decided to join our Get Up to 5 product. And they ran 5Ks 8 weeks later. Awesome. But now 2 years later, the contrast in where they are in their journey is completely different. Because the other lady came along, did the journey, and then kind of went back to herself. And Gareth didn't. Gareth committed to full-term change. And Gareth is a different person. He's physically, mentally, and psychologically. Now, I'm not picking on this other lady, but it's a really interesting thing. And it made me think about long-term change. And when I think about long-term change, there's many tips I can give on this. There's lots of tips. So I just want to give you 5 tips to think about. And I want to put some context around this, because when I talk about long-term change, I want to talk about long-term change where you've actually already experienced some change. And let's think back to that lady I'm talking about this morning. So I'm not talking about you're not doing anything right now. I'm actually talking about that moment where you've actually experienced some success. So it might be that you've gone on a diet and you've lost that 5 kg. Or it might be like that lady, you've started an exercise program and you actually completed it. Or it might be that you started a hobby and you got to your first grade. This is always a really interesting moment because there's a lot of people who get to that moment of the first success and then fall back. And I have that philosophy I talk about, it's that philosophy of going back to default. Going back to default, I want to have change. I do change for a while and then I go back to default. And the analogy I'll use, and I've used it on this podcast before, is that, you're in a relationship and you're in a place where, maybe a little bit dissatisfied in a relationship. You talk to your partner, you decide, you're going to have date night every week. You do it for 3 weeks. It's actually really valuable. And then the 4th week you go, let's watch Netflix. And what's happening is you're going back to default. And often this happens after a moment of success with change. And so the context or the kind of context I want to put this around is this context of once you've already experienced the first point of success, how do you cement long-term change? Okay, so it's not when you're right at the beginning. It's, you've done that first exercise program, you've lost that first bit of weight, you're stuck at some kind of change in dietary habits for a period of time, whatever it is. Okay, first number 1 is don't leave the things that made you successful. Don't leave the things that made you successful. If particularly if you put yourself in an environment around your change. So think back to Gareth and the lady who joined 2 years ago. So she achieved her goal and she signed up to run 5Ks. That was her goal. But then after that, she left our environment. So our environment is great coaching, great camaraderie, great group work, great support, great guidance. She was in a really good environment. And then as soon as she achieved her goal, she left us. She moved on. Now, Gareth, in contrast, committed more to us. He made a commitment to us. And actually, I remember Gareth in his first year, he'd done our 10K group, and we have our half marathon group, and we have our epic one, which you may have heard me talk about in the past, which is this really hard half marathon. And normally we say you had to have done a half marathon to do epic. And Gareth's like, I think I want to do it. And it's like, man, that's a big commitment. And Gareth did it. And so one of the biggest mistakes people make particularly because I'll go back a step. I actually think the best thing you can do if you want to do that first point of change is put yourself in an environment of great leaders. Like, look at my book, that's what I'm all about. And so the first thing is don't leave the thing that made you successful. And don't think you can do it by yourself, especially in this first point. Now, interestingly, it's been one question I've been asked a lot when I've been doing interviews for my book. You know, people say, well, what do you think, how long do you think it actually takes to create long-term, permanent change? And I actually think it's a year to 18 months. I think it's a year to 18 months to create a long-term. Now, you need milestones and stepping stones along the way. So if we think of our running journey, it's that 5K. They tend to do 5K twice, which is basically 4 months. Then they do a 10K twice, which is another 4 months, and then they get up to a half marathon. So it's like a year to get to a half marathon. And then if they come back for the second half marathon group, they tend to exercise forever. That's my experience. Now, there's been milestones along the way, and I think the first thing is if you're not doing it, if you're in an area of no change at all, the first thing is put yourself in an environment of great leaders who know how to guide you. But then when you get your first milestone, don't leave the environment. Like, don't leave it. Seriously, it's one of the biggest mistakes people make is after that first milestone, they leave and they go back to default. So that's my number one. Number two is then once you are not going to leave, is you embrace like crazy. So you actually become a bigger part of the environment. And there's many ways you can do this. You can choose to you can choose to support the environment. It might be that you do volunteer work, or you might help on committees if it's like a sporting club or something like that. You might help to mentor the new people who are coming through. There's ways that you can embrace the environment even more. Because if you embrace the environment even more, you're showing a higher level of commitment to that environment. And I think that's a really important thing to do, because the more you can kind of put your roots into the environment, the better you're going to be. And I'm talking a lot about Gareth today, but Gareth unfortunately he had to go, I think he's Scottish. I can't actually remember if he's Scottish or Irish or even Welsh. I don't know. He's from that part of the world. And he had to go back home because of some family sickness recently. And he didn't get to do the race that he'd been training for, a race that happened a few weeks ago. And he was on Facebook, on our group, giving everyone cheer in the morning, giving everyone a big, he's embracing the group. And I think that's a really important part. So first of all, once you have your first moment of success, don't leave the group or don't leave the environment. But secondly, embrace it and go further. Seriously, if you want to get that long-term change, embrace it. And even a Weight Watchers or a diet loss, how can you support other people on their journey? It's a good way of doing it. Number 3, this is a really important one. Don't stay still. Okay? Keep moving. It's really important, because I look at our running business, and when we look at, sometimes we do get people who do this, they kind of do the Get to 5 product, and that's all they ever do. They just do it over and over again. And to be honest, at the end of the world, at the end of the day, I don't mind that, because, some people, they actually can't go further, so fair enough. But some people are just staying safe. And I think if you want to create long-term permanent change, you have to keep progressing as a person. You have to have moments where you've got to evolve yourself a little bit more. You've got to find higher levels. I love this kind of concept of leveling up. You have to level up in life to be able to do that. And it's a really important part of your success is that, you don't just get to that first point in your achievement and make that the norm. And even though that might be, it might be that you start an exercise routine that you got walking 3 times a week for 30 minutes, and that's more than what you're doing, and that's a really good, healthy routine. Leveling up is a better way to create long-term change. So when you're on this pathway, the third thing to think about is don't sit still, keep moving forward. And it's in your evolution and your development pathway. So it'll be setting high-level goals, creating deeper understanding, working through all these things in the long term. Fourthly, learn yourself. And what I mean by learn yourself is actually become a learner in the area that you're in. So, like if I'm going to use running, start to read running books. Start to watch YouTube clips from people who are experts in this field. Like, start to actually become an educated person in this area. Because I think when you have an education in an area, you do feel more aligned and you do feel a deeper sense of where, of being a part of that world, And so I think ultimately what we want to think about is that, add that learning component to creating long-term change. Because I just think it's an important thing. And then the fifth thing, and I'll be honest, I kind of stole this from the book, to be honest, help others. Like if you say become a teacher, ultimately become a teacher. And it doesn't mean you have to become like a running coach in my running world, but it's that kind of help others. And help others is really interesting, actually, because I think of, like every group needs your social connectors. Like a group, like I think about a group, we've got some people who are more quieter souls, and they'll kind of turn up and they'll sit to the side, and they're actually happy to do that. And it's not, they're just, that's the way they are. And then you'll get people who are real social connectors. And when we think about helping others, it can be as simple as making someone feel welcome into a new environment. Like if you've committed to an environment for a long period of time, helping others can be making someone feel welcomed. Now, it can be because you've learned you're actually helping others in their growth pathway. But I just think when you've got to that level and you're helping other people, do you think you've cemented that behavior for the long term? Ultimately, you are, aren't you? Like if you're teaching and guiding and helping people in many ways in a certain area of your life, you're probably doing pretty well in that life yourself. And so I just think that kind of helping others, and maybe a good thing to think about is don't wait long. Like let's say you are that where that lady was this morning. Start helping people now. Like you don't have to be an expert. Like it doesn't mean that the way you help doesn't have to be that you are the guru in the area. It's just that you can find a way to help other people based on what you can bring to the environment yourself. I think it's a really good way of looking at it. So it's not just, I don't know about running technique. Well, you don't have to help them running technique. You just help them feel welcomed. Or you can help them by giving them some advice on what you learned up to this point in time. Or you can help them, by praising them when they've done well. Like if you think of, if you're helping somebody on their journey, do you think that cements you? And I think that's a really important thing to think about. So what are my 5 things? Okay, well, ultimately it's first of don't leave who made you successful. Totally don't leave it. Actually embrace it. And that's number 2. Embrace what they have to offer. Go deeper into it. Thirdly, don't stand still. Keep moving. Keep progressing. Keep evolving yourself. It's so, so important. Fourthly, learn yourself. So what I mean is start to learn in this area and start to really educate and learn and embrace lots about this area. And then lastly, help others. Like, do you think in an area where maybe you've been a bit yo-yo in the past, do you think if you had cemented those 5 things, you'd be more successful? You probably would, eh? And it's a really good thing to think about. So ultimately what we want is we want you to be more like a Gareth and less like the other. Now, don't get me wrong, the other lady's back and we'll get her there. And I'm not picking on the other lady because far from it. But Gareth's just a really good role model in this example. And I think ultimately when we say we want change, we want permanent change. We just don't want change. Like we want permanent change. And that's where Gareth has nailed it. He's had permanent change in his life. Like I guarantee 5 years from now, I'll see Gareth, and hopefully he's still running with us. But even if he isn't, he'll be running somewhere in this world. And that's what we want to create, permanent change. As always, this will make you be a higher version of yourself. Righto, team, hopefully you enjoyed today's episode. Hopefully some good stuff for you to think about in there, like this whole change, not change, like it's definitely something we've got to get right in life. And I like that last statement I said. We don't want change, we want permanent change. And I think you've got to respect people with, like I remember I spoke to a lady a while ago and she'd lost like 40 kg. And I said, oh, wow, when did you lose weight? She said, 12 years ago. And she hadn't done the op, and I have nothing against the op, but she lost the weight. And I said, wow, man, it's pretty impressive. And she goes, yeah, it's been tough. And she said, Bevan, it always takes effort. But that's permanent change. That's the ultimate. Now, I've chucked 5 key points at you today. I'm sure you've got other things that you can do to create permanent change in your life. Because if you want to create change, you want it forever, don't you? Especially if it's in positive areas. So hopefully there's something there for you. Anyway, that's this week's show pretty much done and dusted. A couple of things. If you want to get my book, my book is passionaboutexercise.com. It's still selling really well. And we haven't even started marketing yet, which is really exciting because we'll start marketing it soon, and that's when we'll really see if we can make it a bigger product. But that's pretty exciting. Remember, when you get my book, you get the workouts. You also get my 7-day goal setting workshop. So get it there. The book's only $37, so you get a book, goal setting workshop, and 12 workouts for just $37. Come on, it's a no-brainer. If you also want to support the show, bevanjameseyles.com. And that's pretty much today's show done. I'll be back in a couple of weeks. I've got an interview. I haven't actually asked the person yet, but I was speaking to them a few weeks ago, and they're doing some study in a really cool area. And I thought, you know what? I need to get this person on the show. And I know they're actually a listener of the show. So, yeah, if you're listening to the show and I was speaking to you a few weeks ago about study, I'm probably going to be in contact with you over the next couple of days. Anyway, that's this week's show done and dusted. As always, keep being you and keep being great.